Claudia Bennett was 76 years old when her daughter-in-law closed the door in her face. The words were spoken without anger, without even the courtesy of hesitation. "You are not allowed in the house until you apologize." It was not shouted, it was not cruel in tone. It was simply delivered as if it were a fact, as if a court clerk had just read out a verdict that could not be appealed. Claudia stood on the front porch, the same porch she had swept every Saturday morning for more than 4 decades, and for the first time she felt like an unwelcome guest at her own home. Her son Daniel was there too, leaning against the doorframe. He would not look at her. His arms were crossed, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the wooden floor, as if the grain of the wood had become the most important thing in the world. Claudia had expected him to say something, anything, even a cough of discomfort. Instead, silence was his answer. She had not come empty-handed. 2 cardboard boxes sat at her feet. Inside were things she thought belonged to all of them. Her late husband Richard's old army uniform, baby photographs of Daniel and his sister. Letters from Claudia's mother written during summers long past. She had carried them down from the attic with care, believing Daniel might want to share them with his daughter Lily one day. But Rebecca, her daughter-in-law, had intercepted the gesture with a laugh that sounded more like a dismissal. "Our things," she had said, as if the family's history could be redrawn with the tilt of her chin. Claudia bent slowly to pick up the boxes again. Her knees ached, her back protested. Yet her voice was steady. "I will leave," she said, "but I will not apologize for remembering the people who loved me." Rebecca folded her arms and replied, "Then you are not welcome here until you do." The words settled over Claudia like the final shovel of dirt on a grave. She walked back to her car, the same car she had parked in that driveway every day for 42 years. The hydrangeas Richard had planted still bloomed blue beside the fence, but Claudia did not cry. Something inside her shifted. By the time she turned onto the main road, she had already decided this was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of something else. Claudia Bennett had not always felt like an intruder in her own life. There was a time when the house was more than bricks and paint. It was her promise to Richard, her late husband, that they would build something lasting together. They bought it in the spring of 1981. The plumbing rattled, the roof leaked in the southeast corner, and the porch sagged like it was holding a secret. But Richard had carried her through the doorway laughing, saying, "We will fix this place, Claudia. We will fill it with our lives." And they did. Every corner bore their fingerprints. From the mismatched knobs on the pantry, Richard insisted, gave character to the scratch on the kitchen tile where Daniel once dropped a cast iron pan. Raising 2 children in that house had demanded every ounce of her strength. Claudia worked double shifts at the library, cooked meals on a tight budget, sewed Halloween costumes from scraps, and still managed to read bedtime stories no matter how tired she was. Richard was steady, dependable, the kind of man who mowed the lawn on Saturdays and held her hand during thunderstorms. When he died suddenly of a stroke, the house became quieter, thinner, as if the walls themselves were grieving. Claudia kept moving because she did not know how else to survive. She volunteered at the hospital, taught part-time at the community college, and forced herself to fill the silence. It was during those heavy months that Daniel had stepped in with the suggestion that changed everything. He offered to help with the property taxes. Claudia, exhausted from navigating insurance forms and funeral arrangements, agreed without hesitation when he proposed putting the title in both their names. It would make things easier, he said. At the time it sounded practical, a way to share responsibility. Claudia never imagined those papers would one day become the key that locked her out of her own home. She told herself she had done the right thing. Parents help their children when they can. That is the natural order, isn't it? She remembered friends who had transferred deeds or bank accounts to their kids for convenience. It seemed normal, almost expected. She trusted Daniel completely. He was her son, the boy she had carried to the hospital when he broke his arm falling from the backyard swing, the teenager she had stayed up with when he failed his first math exam, the young man she had once believed would never turn his back on her. Those memories were the reason she ignored the warning signs. She thought love would protect her from paperwork. She thought decades of sacrifice were stronger than signatures on a deed. But she was wrong. Love had never been written into the contract. Only names and dates had been, and those could be used against her when trust ran dry. That was the cruel irony. Claudia had spent her life protecting the house for them, only to discover the house was now the tool they used to push her out. When Daniel married Rebecca, Claudia welcomed her with hope. She wanted to believe another woman in the family would bring warmth and closeness. At first, she tried to stay out of the way, to give them space. But from the beginning, Rebecca treated Claudia like an outdated footnote in Daniel's story, someone to be tolerated until she quietly faded. It started small, subtle. The mural Richard had painted in their daughter's nursery was painted over within weeks. Claudia said nothing. The old armchair she always used during visits disappeared one day, replaced by sleek bar stools that made her knees ache. When Claudia asked, Rebecca simply smiled and said it did not match the new design. The kitchen became another battleground. Claudia had baked countless loaves of banana bread on those counters, cooked holiday meals until the walls smelled of cinnamon and thyme. Yet Rebecca called it her space now. When Claudia offered to help, she was met with a polite but firm, "That is all right, Claudia. We have it covered." It was never said with cruelty, but with a sweetness that stripped Claudia of her place piece by piece. She was not banned outright. She was erased quietly, replaced by phrases that sounded like kindness but felt like dismissal. Daniel rarely intervened. If Rebecca rolled her eyes at one of Claudia's gifts or corrected her grammar mid-sentence, Daniel changed the subject. When Claudia brought a homemade pie for Thanksgiving, Rebecca joked that it might be too sweet for Lily. Daniel laughed nervously, leaving Claudia to swallow her hurt in silence. It became clear that his loyalty was no longer with the woman who had raised him but with the woman who controlled the room with a smile. Claudia tried to justify it. She told herself it was generational, that Rebecca had grown up in a world of quick solutions, not one where sweaters were knit by hand or photographs carefully preserved. But excuses began to wear thin as the small slights piled up. A forgotten gift here, a corrected sentence there, each moment tiny on its own, but together forming a steady erosion of her place. She was no longer a mother or grandmother at family gatherings. She was a shadow in the corner, tolerated as long as she stayed quiet. What stung most was not Rebecca's cool dismissal but Daniel's silence. Claudia could have endured sharp words if he had defended her. She could have forgiven a heated argument if he had reached for her afterward. But there was nothing. Just silence, and the silence was louder than any insult. It told her she had already been written out of the story they were building, and no one intended to bring her back in. The breaking point arrived on a quiet afternoon when Claudia carried 2 boxes down from her attic. She thought she was bringing a gift, a bridge between generations. Inside one box was Richard's army uniform, carefully preserved for more than 40 years. In the other were baby pictures, family letters, and the notebooks where Richard had scribbled plans for their home. Claudia imagined Daniel and Lily looking through them together, laughing at the crooked smiles, maybe even learning something about the man who had been both father and grandfather. She believed she was offering a piece of history that belonged to them all. But when she placed the boxes on the porch, Rebecca's voice cut through the air. "You went through our things," she said, her eyebrows arched. Claudia froze. Our things. These had been in her attic, her home, her sanctuary for decades. She opened her mouth to explain, but Rebecca was already laughing, short and sharp, as if the boxes were nothing more than clutter dragged from a basement. "Lily does not even remember Richard," she added. "She was 6 when he died. Do not act like dusty boxes make you the guardian of family history." Claudia turned to Daniel, waiting, begging silently for him to intervene. But he stood still, arms folded, his eyes fixed on the floorboards. He said nothing. The silence stretched until it was unbearable. Claudia felt something tighten inside her chest, but her voice did not shake when she replied. "I was not snooping. I was preserving the uniform your father kept clean for 40 years. I thought Lily might want it one day." Rebecca crossed her arms, unbothered. "Then you are not welcome here until you apologize." Those words landed with the weight of betrayal, heavier than any slammed door. Claudia bent down slowly, lifted the boxes again, and whispered, "I will leave, but I will not apologize for remembering the people who loved me." She walked back to her car, the hydrangeas blooming blue beside the fence, and realized something had already changed. By the time she reached the end of the street, she knew this moment would not end with her apology. It would end with her decision. Claudia drove home without shedding a single tear. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, her mind already moving faster than the car itself. For 76 years she had been patient, polite, willing to bend in the name of peace. But standing on that porch, told to apologize for keeping her own memories, had shifted something inside her. She was finished bending. If they thought she would beg her way back in, they did not know her at all. That night she sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, the boxes beside her. She opened Richard's notebook, the one filled with his to-do lists: tighten laundry room valve, oil the gate latch, plan anniversary weekend. It made her smile, but it also reminded her of the life they had built, the bills they had paid, the sacrifices she had carried. Every line in that notebook was proof that this house had been hers long before Daniel or Rebecca ever walked through its doors, and proof she realized could be more powerful than apology. The next morning Claudia put on her gray wool coat and walked into the local bank, the same building where she and Richard had signed the first mortgage decades earlier. A young banker named Henry greeted her politely, but Claudia's voice was firm. "I need to review the ownership documents on my property," she said. "I also need clarity on what rights I still hold." Henry led her to a conference room, spreading the papers across the table. Claudia laid down her records like evidence in a trial: mortgage payments in her name, home equity loan documents she had used to pay for Daniel's graduate degree, receipts for every major renovation she alone had funded. Henry adjusted his glasses, scanning each page carefully. "You and your son own the property as tenants in common," he explained. "That means your share belongs entirely to you. You have the right to sell your interest, or if you choose, the entire property. Daniel cannot block that decision." Claudia leaned back in her chair, a thin smile forming. "Good," she said softly, "because I am not interested in a fight. I am interested in freedom." By the end of the meeting she had requested a full valuation, willing to pay extra for it to be expedited. She left the bank lighter than she had felt in years. On the sidewalk outside she paused, inhaling the crisp Oregon air. For the first time since Rebecca's ultimatum, she did not feel trapped, she felt powerful. Daniel and Rebecca thought they had locked her out, but Claudia knew better. They had handed her the key to her own revenge. Not revenge in the cruel sense, but revenge in the quiet, undeniable act of reclaiming what had always been hers. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Claudia spread the legal documents across her kitchen table. She traced her finger over her name, steady and unshakable on the deed. She whispered to herself, "I do not need their permission. I only need my own." And for the first time in a long time she believed it. Claudia began packing that very night, not frantically, not with tears, but with a quiet purpose that surprised even her. She pulled out 3 boxes and labeled them carefully. One read, "Things that belong to me." Another said, "Not coming with me." The last, simply, "Going forward." It was her way of reclaiming order, of proving that every step she took now was deliberate. Into the first box she placed Richard's wristwatch, a photo from their first year of marriage, and the recipe card for his favorite blueberry pie. She added Lily's childhood drawings that had once hung proudly on Claudia's refrigerator. These were not just objects. They were anchors, proof of the life she had lived, proof of the love she had given. In the second box, she tossed the apron Daniel had bought from a department store with the price tag still dangling, the candle in a scent she hated but pretended to like, and the wall plaque Rebecca had given her that read, "Live, Laugh, Love." Those things had never been hers. They belonged to someone else's version of family, not hers. It was as she taped the lid shut that she heard a knock. When she opened the door, Lily stood there, hoodie pulled over her head, eyes soft but worried. "Grandma, can I come in?" Claudia stepped aside, her heart easing for the first time in days. They sat at the kitchen table, the boxes stacked neatly beside them. Lily glanced at them but said nothing at first. Instead she asked about Richard, about the house, about the recipes Claudia once made on Sunday mornings. Claudia let her talk, let the questions flow, and when Lily finally asked, "Why are you doing all this?" Claudia took her hand gently. "I am not doing this to punish anyone. I am doing it to stop punishing myself." Lily's eyes brimmed with tears she tried to hide, but she nodded slowly. For the first time in years Claudia felt understood. Not by her son, not by the daughter-in-law who had erased her, but by her granddaughter who still saw her as whole. In that moment Claudia knew that leaving was not abandonment, it was a gift, and Lily was the one person who would carry it forward. By Friday the appraisers had walked through the house and confirmed what Claudia already knew. The foundation was solid, the roof strong, the walls filled with stories. She was ready to list it for sale. But news travels quickly, even when you try to keep it quiet. Daniel saw the listing online first. His voice came to her through a voicemail, sharp and confused. "Mom, what are you doing? You cannot just sell the house. That is our family home, my home. You did not even discuss it with me." His words carried the weight of entitlement, not the sound of love. By noon his messages grew harder. "You are being irrational. This is not like you." "What are you trying to prove?" Claudia listened once, then set the phone down. She had no intention of proving anything. She was simply choosing herself after years of silence. When Rebecca's message followed later that evening, it read like a formal letter. "We understand you are upset, but your actions affect everyone. You should have involved us. You are destabilizing the family structure." Claudia laughed quietly to herself. The family structure had been one way for years, all give from her side and all take from theirs. Meanwhile, Claudia visited the bank once more. This time she did not ask about deeds or titles. She asked about setting up a trust. "I would like it in Lily's name," she told the banker. "Full amount, long-term, secure." He asked if she wanted stipulations. "Just one," she answered. She must never have to ask anyone's permission to use it. When the papers were signed, Claudia felt lighter. This was her answer to Daniel's demands, her reply to Rebecca's lectures. She would not argue or defend herself. Her revenge would not come in raised voices but in legacy. She was giving power to the one person who had never tried to make her small. Lily would inherit freedom, not control, and that was more valuable than any house. Claudia left the house behind without ceremony. No farewell dinners, no sentimental speeches, just a moving truck, a few carefully chosen boxes, and her own steady resolve. She found a small cottage on the edge of town, nothing grand, just one bedroom with a porch that faced a patch of wild rosemary. The first evening she sat outside with a mug of chamomile tea, listening to the crickets in the grass and the distant hum of the ocean. For the first time in years she felt still, not lonely, not abandoned, but free. Inside, the cottage smelled faintly of cedar and old books. She unpacked slowly, placing Richard's wristwatch on the nightstand, setting Lily's drawings above the desk, and tucking the recipe card into the kitchen drawer. Each item she kept carried weight, not as reminders of pain but as proof of survival. On the table lay a plain spiral notebook she had bought from the corner store. On the first page she wrote 3 simple sentences. "I am not a burden. I am not a backup plan. I am not sorry." The words steadied her like a prayer. Lily visited the following weekend, bringing scones and orange juice. She looked around the cottage with wide eyes and said, "It feels like home here. Quiet but real." Claudia smiled, pouring tea into mismatched cups. They sat at the table for hours, talking about school, about books, about the future. At one point Lily grew quiet and whispered, "They are angry, Grandma. Really angry." Claudia reached across the table and took her hand. "They are entitled to their feelings," she said. "But I am entitled to mine." That night Claudia went to bed with the window open, the scent of rosemary drifting in on the breeze. She thought of all the rooms she had once filled with silence to keep the peace, and for the first time she realized silence could also be chosen. It could mean freedom. The house sold on a Thursday afternoon. Claudia received the confirmation in a simple envelope. Funds received. Transaction complete. New owners moving in by the end of the month. She read the letter once, folded it neatly and set it aside. There was no champagne, no celebration. Instead, she sat on the porch of her little cottage, tea in hand, and watched the sun slide behind the horizon. What she felt was not triumph but alignment. For the first time in decades, her life belonged to her. Messages from Daniel and Rebecca continued, filled with disappointment and accusations. Claudia did not answer. She no longer needed to. Her silence was not surrender, it was clarity. She had stopped auditioning for a place in their story. She had chosen to write her own instead. And in that story she was not erased, she was whole. That evening she wrote a letter to Lily. "Sweetheart, the house is gone, but I am still here. Remember this, we are not defined by the spaces we are allowed into. We are defined by the ones we refuse to shrink inside of. One day you may find yourself in a room where your voice does not matter. When that happens, you have permission to leave. You deserve air that does not require apology. Use your freedom boldly, joyfully, without fear. And if anyone asks why you walked away, tell them you were raised by a woman who finally did the same." She sealed the letter and placed it beside the teapot. Then she stepped outside, breathing in the cool night air, carrying nothing but herself. No burdens, no expectations, no apologies. Just Claudia Bennett, 76 years old, whole again and unafraid. To those listening now, if you have ever felt small in a room you once called home, let this be your reminder. You do not need permission to reclaim your place. Share your story. Leave a comment. Let the silence end here, and let your voice begin.